Hello YouTube, this is Throttle. Today I will talk about ways to reduce lag and avoid lag. If you play on a server and a lot of players are online, then you will probably have encountered lag in some form. Now, I talked about this in my last video where I measured some lag. I will link this in the description. But basically, the server runs in ticks. The server has to do 20 ticks a second. And if one tick takes longer than 50 milliseconds, then we are in trouble. In this case, we have our carpet mod giving us an estimate of the tick per second, or MSPT. So here we have an MSPT of 47, which is just okay, so you won't see any lag. But if we get a lot higher than that, the server will begin to struggle. Now, if you run carpet, then you can get this way by typing log TPS, which stands for ticks per second, which will enable this carpet display. Or you could also do something called profile health. And in this case, we have a tick time of 61 milliseconds, which is quite a lot. And carpet gives you some information where this lag comes from. You see, the biggest lag source in this case are overworld mobs, entities, but also nether entities. And if you want to get a quick information about entities specifically, then you can do profile entities. And you will see the top CPU hogs. In this case, it's the bees from this bee farm. So let's get away from that in a moment. But you also see that the lag does not come from one single large source, but from a lot of smaller lag sources. So there isn't one thing that we can just turn off or get away from, but instead we'll have to lag optimize all of these little lag sources. And if you want to build a lag optimized way, you probably want to avoid lag in any of your builds. Rule number one when avoiding lag is really unloaded areas do not cause lag. If this bee farm, for example, is not loaded, it will not generate lag. So not loading areas or farms is the best way to avoid lag. And if you build laggy machines like this bee farm, then build it in a dedicated area that is usually not loaded. So this is the nether, no player has a base nearby. So this bee farm is only loaded if I'm nearby or if I enable this chunk loader here. If I fly away, this specific lag source is gone. Also, and this is my industrial district here where I have a lot of farms. For example, I keep my villager trading hall about 200 blocks away, and with our standard render distance of 10 chunks for the server, this is okay. So these villagers will also be only loaded if I'm here at my villager trading hall. They will not be loaded if I'm over there working in my industrial district. So a good rule is keep your mobs, especially villagers and frogs, which are among the most laggy mobs that there are out there, keep them away from the areas where you usually are. If they are not loaded, they cannot cause any lag. Now also the reason why I can see this at all is that I use the Bobby mod. The Bobby mod saves a local copy of the area and pretends that it's there, even though it's not loaded by the server. And this is different from the vanilla client. There, if I see the area, it's also loaded. Here I see the area, even though it's not loaded. If I look over at my villager trading hall, I see that there are no villagers there. This is precisely because Bobby does not store the entities. So even though I can see it in my client, this area is not loaded. And loaded in this case means that it's processed, so the game will tick it. And for that, the simulation distance is relevant. We have a simulation distance of 10 chunks. So as a ballpark figure, if you keep your entities 180 blocks or more away, then they are not loaded. So let's discuss how to store villagers. And unfortunately, I made a mistake in my last video. So let's get it right this time. We have a baseline of 200 villagers that create a lag of 9.61 MSPT. And the obvious question is it better to have them boxed in like that in little cubicles, or even to have them in minecarts to prevent them from pathfinding? And the TLDR is, it's a little bit better to have them in cubicles, and I got that wrong in my last video, but it's worse to have them in minecarts. So I would recommend to get rid of these minecarts there. As you can see, 9 MSPT. This is just a tiny bit better than free range villagers that can walk around. And the embarrassing truth is that in the last video I just miscounted the entities. So I had a lot more villagers than I thought. Well, stuff happens. So villagers in cubicles are maybe 10% less laggy than free-range villagers, which is actually worse than I hoped. So I hoped that we would get a significant lag reduction from storing the villagers this way. Another popular way to organize villagers is to have them in minecarts, possibly also in little cubicles, because then they can't pathfind to the other workstations. And the lag is actually a bit worse at 10.92 MSPT. So it appears that the minecarts just add a bit of lag instead of removing the pathfinding for the villagers. Now, when talking about villagers, these villager-based crop farms are very popular. Of course, there are different ways to do that. These just have hoppers below. This is an old world of mine. Do not do that. It's terrible because these types of farms produce maybe 150 wheat per villager, maybe 300 carrots. I don't know the exact values. It's in the ballpark. It's not a lot. And again, these villagers are terribly laggy. And what you want to do instead are these micro farms. And I did one in my Get Good series recently. I will also link the original design. These farms are very fast. They produce about 15,000 wheat per hour, I think. That means they produce as much wheat as 100 villagers. And of course, they cause no lag at all, because if they're turned off, well, we have a bit of minimal lag from these hoppers here, feeding in the bone meal, but that's it. So do not use villager-based farms, do micro farms. Another important thing is that chunk loaders should only run if you really need them. For example, here I have a smelter that cannot be unloaded. It's my 100 furnace super smelter that I did. So when I leave the area, I will have 2 chunk loaders loading the smelter. Here's one of them. And here's the other. However, you can see that this chunk loader is blocked by a redstone signal. And this redstone signal will be turned on if no more items come in. That means if this furnace has finished smelting, it will automatically shut off the chunk loaders and unload the area. I can fly safely away. Go, for example, to the nether. And my smelter is still loaded due to the chunk loaders, but it will turn itself off once it's done. Now the next thing might sound trivial, but just run farms when you need the resources. Do not run farms if you need resources in a couple of years. Run your farms if you need the resources now. Also, if you AFK in a laggy farm, or if you run a laggy farm, for example this bee farm or this gold farm, do not do it at a time where a lot of players are online. If you AFK in a farm, and of course this goes only for a multiplayer server, if you AFK in a farm, check from time to time what the lag situation is, and if there are a lot of players online, then please do not run your farms. If you've seen my last video, then you know that entities can cause a ton of lag. So there are 2 choices. One is you keep your laggy entities away, like my villager trading hall, or the other one is just reduce the number of entities if you don't need them. For example, I use these sniffers to get the torch flowers and whatnot, but after I have had enough, I reduce these sniffers to 3, so I can always breed them up later. The same with my sheep. So this is my wool farm, and I'm keeping a few sheep so that I can breed them up again, but I killed most of them that were in here. Now about hostile mob, usually you will have 70 per player, because the game tries to spawn 70 hostile mobs for each player. However, if the game does not find any spawning spaces for them, it won't create them. So one thing you can do is try to light up the caves around your base and eliminate their spawning spaces. And it takes quite a while, because you need to light up pretty much all of them. But if you are successful, you won't spawn nearly as much hostile mobs, or maybe even no hostile mobs at all. And one big issue are mobs that pick up stuff, like zombies picking up armor or items, because they are permanent, they won't count against the mob cap. So the game will try to spawn 70 hostile mobs beyond those, and they will never despawn. So it's a good idea to go caving from time to time. use a tool like FreeCam to find those mobs that have picked up items and to kill them. I wasn't as diligent as I should have been here. I will take a bit of time in the next couple of days to light up those caves. Now minecarts are entities as well, especially hopper minecarts. So for example here I have a farm that produces bamboo and sugarcane. What a good thing is to do is to run these minecarts only if you need them. Now these minecarts, once they have completed their run, they will go into the heater and then they will not be redispensed until this flying machine harvests for the next time. So these hopper minecarts going into the heater are safely stored and will not cause any lag. Now keep in mind that boats are entities as well. Now if you have a couple of boats around your base, that's not a problem, but try not to use scores of them. Let's go to a creative copy of the world for the next part. So usually a player will spawn only 70 hostile mobs. The exception of course are portal-based farms. So for example, in this gold farm the player stands here, spawns the mobs down here, the mobs go into another portal and are transported to the overworld. And this is a 2-player farm on a server. But you see that this farm creates a ton of mobs in the overworld. Much more than 70 mobs. So if we do log mob caps, which is another carpet feature, we see that we already have over 600 mobs here. And of course, the lag that goes with these 600 mobs is considerable. So this is a farm that absolutely should be run only if there are few players on the server. And you will have to monitor the lag if it stays below 50 MSPT if you run this farm. And since we're talking about this type of farm, there's another issue. This farm creates a lot of waste items like swords and rotten flesh. And items create a ton of lag. And it is really important that you burn these items and not let them despawn. So just have a sorting system and whatever is not sorted will go into fire, or you can also use lava if you like. This also goes for XP. Now on our server we have carpet XP no cooldown, which is rather nice because you can kind of absorb all of the XP orbs. On other servers you might have an excess of XP orbs, and these are even worse than items because they don't despawn for 1 hour. So if you're in such an environment where you have excess XP, make also sure that the excess XP orbs are burned. Now talking about items, I do have a central storage here for this industrial district with all of the items coming in. However, you will notice that all of the farms that produce these items are rather close to the storage. So for example, this tree farm, this bamboo, sugarcane, pumpkin, melon farm. And the thing about items is, items are really laggy if they are transported for a long time, regardless of how you transport them. So here I just use water streams. And one thing that you really need to do is to group the items to stacks. And there are several ways to do that. For example, let's start these flying machines for the Redstone farm here. And if we would just send these items as they are to the storage, they would pretty much all be transported as one item. So what I do, apart from making sure that they don't overload the hoppers, so I just buffer them here. But here, instead of having them as single items, I will just group them to stack here. And one good way to do that is to use a slab on ice in a water stream that is really short. So this water stream is high, and you can see that the items will stop here. And when they stop here, the game will combine them to stacks. So you will create small stacks of maybe 7 or 8 items a piece. And then you transport these stacks. And the thing about the stacks is that to transport a stack of an item is the same lag as it costs to transport a single item. So if you have a stack of say 10 items, that's 10 times as lag efficient as transporting 10 items individually. And a way to group items to even larger stacks is to use cobwebs. So now let's just wait a moment until we get items here. There we go. Just dropping these items into a cobweb will actually group them to stacks of up to 20 items. So if you dispense items of the same type, because they all will be basically dispensed in the middle of the cobweb and they will be grouped together And then these items just fall down into the water stream and are transported in stacks. A little thing, but very efficient. But still, I wouldn't really recommend to transport all of these items over huge distances. So for example, I've also created farm like this chorus farm here. And instead of moving the items all the way over there, I just created a local storage with shulker box loaders. So the items will go here into a shulker box and I will move the shulker box around manually. Of course, you could also send the shulker boxes to a central storage with a shulker box loader. Now, let's talk about redstone lag. And if we talk about lag, many people think about like using rails instead of dust and stuff like this and locking hoppers. But in my opinion, usually if you have lag issues, most of the time the lag comes from either mobs or from items. So it makes sense to optimize redstone, obviously. As I said in the beginning, it makes sense to optimize every aspect of the game for lag, but it may not be the game changer that you think. And let's use the smelter again. And it's absolutely true that rails are less laggy than redstone dust, by a factor of 3 roughly, as I measured in my last video. So here you see all of these blinking rails. Now, redstone components do not cause any lag if they are not changed, with the exception of hoppers, of course, because hoppers have to check if they can pick up items and if they can move items. But components like observers, rails, droppers, they do not cause any lag if they are not powered. However, if they are changed, and changed quickly in this case, they can create quite significant lag. Now, if we look at the smelter in the world download, there are actually 2 reasons why it's good. The first reason is that it almost has no redstone dust, just a tiny bit here in the shulker box loader and in the detection here if we should eject the shulker box. And the other reason is that it has no open hoppers. We have here 4 hoppers per furnace and we could bring this down actually to 3 if I would distribute the fuel using droppers here, but I didn't. And these hoppers are all covered. So many super smelters have a design like this, that they distribute the items and the fuel using minecarts, which is of course the easiest way. However, these hoppers are open. That means they are not redstone locked, they are not covered with composters or other containers, and we have 2 open hoppers per furnace. What you can do, of course, is to redstone lock these hoppers, because this way redstone locked hoppers cause the least amount of lag that's possible. But then of course you need some logic to turn off the redstone if a minecart goes past. So that's another possibility to do that. Personally, I like this design not for lag reasons, but mainly because I don't like minecarts. They're always prone to collide with some entity or to get stuck when they are unloaded. So in my opinion, the less moving minecarts, the better. So I will still go with this design here over that design. But from a lag perspective, this system here is fine. The same goes for sorting systems, which is of course a bit tricky if you have water streams, for example. But if you have, for example, a sorting system like that, which is a traditional signal strength independent sorting system, you could try to lock these hoppers, for example, from the side, and redstone lock these hoppers and unlock them only if items are coming in. For example, detected by a golden pressure plate. Also, and now let's go to an older world of mine, because nowadays I wouldn't do this anymore. It's not a good idea to use hopper lines for item transport. So instead, always use water transport. And why is water better? These water lines do not create any lag unless you are actually transporting items. So nothing comes in. These water streams will not create any lags. It's different for these hoppers. These hoppers, they are not terribly laggy, but hoppers will create constant lag even if they are covered with composters. Because these hoppers always have to check, is an item in me? Do I have to move an item? If in question, always use a water transport and not a hopper line. Right, another thing are light updates. And these redstone torches actually create light updates. They emit a light level of 7 if they are on. And if the system is sorting and it's blinking, then you will create light updates unless, of course, you have a better light source. So this light source here creates a light level of 15. That means the redstone torch will not change the light level of the surrounding area. So let's maybe show this in a redstone testing world. And let's create a simple clock. And you see that the light level are constantly changing for these blocks here. However, if we just place some light source here, the light level is constant and does not change. So whenever you have redstone torches that are flickering, that are blinking, make sure to have light sources in the area. Personally, I prefer to integrate light sources in my redstone build so that I just don't have to think about it. These hoppers are transparent, or I will just use, for example, frog lights as solid blocks, because they also have the advantage that they are not spawnable, so I don't have to worry about anything spawning there. So these were some tips to reduce lag. I hope you enjoyed them. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you want to see more content like this. Please subscribe so that you don't miss any of my videos, and see you next time. Bye bye.